We're gonna go live. Give it the seconds that it takes. Did you know that there's a 20-second delay in between when I turn this on and when it actually gets started? Okay, I see it, and goodness, okay, I see it. Isn't that great? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started, though. Good morning, if anybody's logging on now. I've got one person. That's awesome. I do want to say before we get started into the actual thing, Happy New Year, since it's still January. I don't know about how your year has started, but hopefully it's going off pretty well. If it's not, let's just say you're getting all of the bad luck out of the way right now for the new year, and the rest of it will hopefully be smooth sailing. But with that said, hope it's all going well. And we're going to have a lot of fun stuff, I think, planned for this year. But for today and for January, we're going to be talking about Cedar Waxwing, so that's going to be fun. For those of you that don't know, my name is Jolene. I'm a certified songbird feeding specialist with Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord. And today we are discussing Cedar Waxwings, so that should be a lot of fun. If you guys have any questions during the presentation, definitely feel free to comment. I am keeping an eye on that. Good morning as well. Hope you're all doing well. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started, too. So first off, we always got to talk about the natural history because that's sometimes some of the more interesting stuff, for me anyways. These guys are still in the order Passeriformes, so perching songbirds, usually what we see a lot of outside, but they are in the family Bombycilidae, which actually translates from Latin to silktail, because if you've ever seen a waxwing, they look pretty silky smooth, and not every bird looks like that. Bombycilidae consists only of waxwings. There's 3 species, 2 of which are found in North America, so that'll be really fun to talk about. For this case, we're primarily talking about the cedar waxwing. The habitat these guys prefer is more of an open woodland area, but they do also, I'm getting some good morning from Texas. That's fun. I'm getting other good mornings. I hope you're all doing well. So they do like those open woodlands, but the main thing that constitutes whether or not they'll be in that area is if there are any fruiting shrubs or trees. So any types of berries or fruits. That's really important for waxwings. And we'll talk more about that in a second as well. These guys are migratory, so let's take a look at their map here, and this is for the cedar waxwing specifically. This purple range right in the middle, that's where they're found year-round, so you can find them year-round there. This kind of peach color, orange, whatever you want to call it, is basically their summer range or their breeding range. So some of them will push a little bit farther north into Canada for their nesting, and then when it hits wintertime, because the temperatures are a little bit cooler, they have no problem going all the way down to Central America either. Good afternoon from Norway. Oh my goodness, that's crazy. Hello. Sorry. Okay. So one thing I want to point out for at least those of us in North Carolina, because that's where we're located, you could see that right here we do have some range in the year-round. This is because right through this location is the Appalachian Mountains, so that's higher elevations, usually cooler compared to the Piedmont and coastal areas of North Carolina here. So the fun fact is where we live, at least, those of you that are in the mountains or do travel there, you can find cedar waxwings in the summertime. Most of the time in this location, we only get them in the winter. So sometimes in the summer, we do have the few individuals that do nest in like the Piedmont area, but for the most part, you're going to find that in those higher elevations year-round as well too. But this one is really fun because it's wintertime, so we are going to see them this time of year. Someone said they saw their first one earlier this week. Yes, that's so awesome. So, really fun thing about waxwings is that when they usually travel together, so they're usually in large flocks. So they do have a name for those. A flock of waxwings is either called a museum or an earful, and we'll talk about why that is in a second. The oldest cedar waxwing individual that we know of was 7 years and 1 month old. The way they determine this is usually through banding practices where they'll capture an individual, band it, and then release it, and then they'll recapture it later on. That's usually kind of how they determine that. So when it comes to ID of cedar waxwings, and actually waxwings in general, you're going to be looking at 2 things. Because sometimes, depending on where they are, you don't get a good look at their colors. So their shape is pretty iconic, which is really good. First off, this crest is something that, yeah, a lot of birds have that. Cardinals have that. Blue jays have that. Other birds kind of have those tufts that kind of pop up. But the cedar waxwing does have a crest that kind of goes a little bit farther. It doesn't stay flush to the head. So you've just kind of got that pointed of a crest right at the end. So that's actually an iconic factor for them. Not only that, but these guys do have pretty pointed wings, so they don't stay flush to the body. They do kind of separate, so you do usually see that with the silhouette or the shadow that they're at. And you also have a pretty square tail. So it's not notched, it's not rounded. It's also not super long or super short. You can see the difference between the wings and the tail. So those three factors, when you're looking at the shape of a cedar waxwing, are really important to identify. Now the color is where it gets really interesting, because if you see the color, you know without a shadow of a doubt that it's a cedar waxwing. Waxwings have a gray-brown kind of plumage, so it either kind of shifts in this gradient or it's more of one color. It all depends on the individual. And they do have a pale yellow belly. When you're looking at the specific features, cedar waxwings do have a black mask that goes over both of its eyes. It is usually edged with white. It can be more or less white depending on the age of the individual. Not only that, but they also have red-tipped secondaries. When people first saw cedar waxwings, they thought that their feathers looked like they were dipped in wax, hence the waxwing of their name. Also, I'm pretty sure, if it helps remember the flock titles, a wax museum is kind of where that comes from as well, too. So that's why it's called a museum of waxwings. Not only that, but these guys do also have a tail band at the bottom of their tail. Usually it is a yellow coloration. However, they get this coloration by the food that they eat. So in recent years, with the increase of exotic honeysuckles, it has been found that they'll usually eat those foods, and that does change some cedar waxwings' tail band to an orange instead of a yellow. So that's how that comes to be sometimes. So if you see an orange tail band, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Now, their call is very simple. Usually, a lot of songbirds have a song and a call, but in this case, cedar waxwings only have one style, and this is their call. It's a single note, kind of a buzz and a trill. So it is a very iconic call. It's one of those things where you hear it and you like automatically prick your head up and you know. But like I said, these guys do enjoy to be in flocks, so also you can hear this. Hopefully you guys hear that pretty well and it's not blasting your eardrums, but I'm really bad. Good afternoon from Serbia. Hello, that's so cool. So in this case, sometimes you can get a lot of individuals talking at once, and it gets pretty chaotic. Once again, sorry if that's loud. It's kind of harder for me to figure that stuff out on my end. But you could tell that's really loud, kind of like an earful almost. So that's kind of also the reason why they're called an earful as well with a flock of waxwings. So keep those in mind anytime you want to share a fun fact. Now, like I mentioned, there's two species in North America. First off, again, for us, we have the cedar waxwing in our location, but there is also the Bohemian waxwing up in Canada that can sometimes spread down to the Rockies and the northern states, depending on the time of year. The main difference between these two, and first off, you can tell, oh, hello from Raleigh, that's so fun. So you can tell with the shape, once again, you've got your crest right here on both species. In this case, the wings do kind of pop out. Sometimes it's hard to tell on that side, but you do also have that square tail. So there's certain things you can look for within a species, right? Or within those that are related. But you've also got those specific characteristics. So with the Bohemian waxwing, they have more of a reddish-orange tint on the crest and on the cheek. They have a pale gray belly in comparison to the yellow, and then on the wing, which is probably the most obvious thing, is they've got some white bands as well as yellow accents on the primary feathers, as well as the white streaks as well. So you could tell there's some differences there too. So if you happen to be in an area where both species are around, make sure you keep an eye out for those differences. So cedar waxwings and waxwings in general are primarily frugivores, which means that most of their diet consists of fruit. And they honestly do so well on just a fruit diet that they can sustain themselves for a long period of time on just fruit, which that is not something that a lot of birds can do, or at least depending on the songbirds we have here, not many make for just that type of thing. They can go a few months with just fruit alone. Of course, also, with how much fruit they go through, they don't go through the effort of regurgitating the seed or worrying about any of that. The seeds obviously just pass right through the whole digestive system there, and when they do come out unscathed. So if you do have a flock of cedar waxwings visiting, it's not unsurprising to have different types of plants a few months later that were not originally there. So cedar waxwings are very helpful for transferring different plant populations to different locations, just because of how much fruit they eat and how they travel. Now, depending on the time of year, sometimes the fruit stores can get a little lower, like the fruit stock in the wild. I said that odd, but what can you do? Sometimes they do get a little low, so anywhere from May to September, where there's a lot of insect populations, they'll consider adding insects to their diet, and they do that a little bit as well too. And like I said earlier, throughout any time of year, these guys are pretty nomadic, in which case you'll find large flocks of them. So like these pictures are not uncommon, especially in the winter time where you have like 20 to 30 to crazy amounts of individuals, but usually they're only in certain locations for maybe a few weeks or a few days. You can never guarantee when they're going to be on the move. Just know that if you've got fruit in your yard, chances are there's you can kind of cross your fingers in hopes that cedar waxwings will eventually come your way as well too. Now, whether it's because of their fruit diet or the birds themselves, these guys are voracious eaters, so they eat a lot, as much as they can all the time. This does come with some downsides that it's important to be aware of in case you see any strange behavior. In the summertime or certain times of year, when fruit is ripe for too long, sometimes it gets a little fermented. And the birds don't always pay attention to that, so half the time they'll eat their fill, and they do get a little drunk, and they get a little wobbly, and they can't quite get their bearings straight because they had too much. So this is something that occasionally happens. So if you ever see a wobbly waxwing, it's very possible that they might have had a little too much of their fill. You can always contact a rehabilitator to double check if there's anything you can do, if it's like a large flock of them. If it's just a few individuals, you can always kind of set them in a box for a little bit, kind of let them have a safe place to get their bearings, because they are very vulnerable at this time period. Give them like 30 minutes to kind of get themselves together, and then let them go ahead and sober up, and they'll fly out as well too. So that's always an option there. One downside as well that can happen, especially with how a lot of ornamental plants are being introduced in landscaping, is cyanide poisoning. In most cases, a lot of plants have like the ones that we have here anyways, have very low dosages of cyanide in the berries. So for most cases, for birds that do enjoy some fruit here and there, it's not an issue. But like I just said, cedar waxwings are voracious eaters. So there have been a few instances where there have been whole flocks of waxwings that come down with cyanide poisoning and sadly don't make it. So if you're considering landscaping and different options to include in your yard, in both cases that they kind of checked this cyanide poisoning, they found that it was Nandina or heavenly bamboo. Now, I'm not saying that if you have Nandina or heavenly bamboo in your yard, that's automatically a problem for like all your birds. In most cases, it's okay, but it's still one of those things where, again, if there's cedar waxwings around, there is a probability that they might check out those berries, because they do look very similar to other items that they already eat. So when you're thinking about landscaping, definitely consider what's safe for your birds. When you're kind of taking that all into consideration, because the last thing we want is to hurt any of the wildlife that are in our yard either. Definitely go with kind of native plants, which, let's see, somebody asked what the best trees and bushes to plant for cedar waxwings are. I will definitely have that later in the presentation as well. And yes, it is, I do get a good chuckle out of the drunk cedar waxwings, but it is definitely a moment of vulnerability, so helping them out if you can is always appreciated on their end too. So when it comes to courtship, this is actually pretty adorable for cedar waxwings. I'm excited. I have a video, so that's always fun. These guys form pairs in anywhere from April to June, so it's a little bit later compared to some other species that we have here. They are monogamous, so they do stay with one individual throughout the entire season. Next year, they might pick somebody else. All depends on the pairs. When they're looking for a potential mate, they do look for those red feathers on the secondaries, because that's an important signal. That, as well as the mask. So the more red feathers an individual has, and the larger the black mask on the face, indicates an older individual. The less feathers and the more white on the face indicate a younger individual. So these are important factors for the waxwings to determine. Probably also how those feathers are maintained and how the individual looks are really important as well too. Researchers have found that older pairs of waxwings do nest earlier than younger pairs. Chances are they kind of know what's ahead of them, so they're just being prepared. So possibly they'll have a second brood, or just being prepared in case the worst happens. But while they're trying to figure out who their potential suitor will be for that season, they do have some courtship rituals that are very cute. First off is that courtship feeding, so that's just when the male usually feeds the female different types of food items. And then there's also the courtship hopping video, and this is basically when two cedar waxwings pass a food item back and forth, or a type of item back and forth between each other. So they'll take a step back, and then they'll return the item. Take a step back and then return the item. And this can go for however long they want it to. It's up to them. But it is, in fact, very adorable. So if you happen to see this, just know you're witnessing a courtship act between two waxwings. I will go ahead and pause that there. So when it comes to nesting, for us in North Carolina, nesting season is from March to August. Again, June to August is when these waxwings are nesting. We're not going to see too much of that in our area because this is going to be in that year-round range or their nesting range up farther north. But if you go into the mountains, you might see them there, and that's always fun. When they found their potential mate, the female chooses the nesting site. So she's going to choose somewhere that's at the edge of the woods, maybe some isolated trees or shrubs. If it's by a fruit orchard or young pine plantations, that's a bonus. So it all depends on that as well. They're not super territorial of like an entire territory. They might be territorial of their nesting site, but because these birds are usually so social, there's not as much of that concern of arguments amongst the waxwings. When they do pair up, they do gather materials together, but the female is the one that builds the nest. It can take anywhere from 5 to 6 days, so a little less than a week. The nest itself is going to be pretty bulky and pretty open, but it's going to be a cup nest. These guys, like I mentioned, they do have that mask on their face. Kind of think of it like a cartoonish bandit because these guys will use parts of other built nests, whether it's being used currently or otherwise, and they'll take that for their own materials. So it's not uncommon to see them stealing from a Baltimore Oriole nest or a previously used nest, and they'll just kind of put it where they need to go. They can have a variety of materials, so twigs, cattail down, moss, dead leaves, all depends on where they're at. But some indications that it's a cedar waxwing nest include dangling grasses or fruiting heads, such as catkins of oak or hickory. So they kind of have some stuff that dangles on the outside. During this time of year, they can have anywhere from 1 to 2 broods, which have anywhere from 2 to 6 eggs. Usually it's 1, but again, like I said, those older individuals nest a bit earlier, so they might try for a second if the resources are good. These eggs are usually pale blue or gray, and they do have black or gray splotches on the outside as well too. You'll notice that it's kind of concentrated on one end versus another, so at the top of the egg where it's narrow, it's pretty simple and like doesn't have those splotches, but towards the base of the egg you see a lot more of that, but it's not in any specific pattern. While the female is incubating the eggs, the male acts as a guard and brings her food while she's incubating. And the incubation period can happen anywhere from 11 to 13 days, so a little less than 2 weeks. And the nesting period, so when they finally hatch, when they do hatch, they are altricial young, which means they don't have any feathers, maybe a few downy tufts, but they're naked, they're blind, they're defenseless, and they require on the parents to care for them. So this nesting period, where these individuals are getting all of their feathers and getting together, is anywhere from 14 to 18 days, so a little more than 2 weeks. So overall, these guys are hatched and out of the nest by about 5 weeks. When the nestlings are when they're originally born, there's a few things that first happen as well, and I tried to get a picture of this too. The nestlings themselves have very bright red mouths with neon, like kind of almost pink lines. So if you look at this picture here, right where the mouth is, there's like 2 lines that are especially bright when a cedar waxwing opens its mouth. So consider those lines and consider the yellow of the beak itself as they open their mouth. All right, imagine yourself a cedar waxwing bringing food back to the nest. You've just gotten there, the food is big, and suddenly you have 3 or 4 faces screaming at you to put the food in their mouths, okay? That's really hard to look at sometimes. So basically the point of these lines and the bright neon mouths is to say, hey, put food here, that's important, that's where it goes. So the waxwing just puts food in there and then goes to get some more and continues this process. So a lot of young actually have those types of indicators to help the parents figure out where to put the food. Because again, there's a lot going on. When the nestlings are first born, they do have a high insect diet for 3 days, or for a few days at least. This is because regardless of what species it is, having protein is very important for bone growth and feather growth as well too. So these birds need it. And then once they've kind of got that boost in the beginning, they switch to a higher fruit diet. Now, something that is pretty interesting is, for those that don't know, we do have a bird called a brown-headed cowbird in this location. These birds are known for being parasitic nesters, which is a breeding strategy, or not a breeding, a nesting strategy, where a female will lay an egg in another species nest. So in this case, let's say brown-headed cowbird lays an egg in a wren nest. Okay, so this egg hatches along with the other eggs, and then sometimes causes competitive issues where it might push out the original young, and the wren, not knowing any better, thinks it's they're young, so they'll take care of it until it's fully fledged. And it's a very interesting sight to see. And it is an effective strategy, but in this case, it doesn't work well with the cedar waxwings, because if a brown-headed cowbird lays an egg in the nest of a cedar waxwing, this young cowbird is going to get a high fruit diet, which again, like I said, is very unusual for at least a lot of the songbirds we have here. So in that case, usually the brown-headed cowbird young cannot survive on that high fruit diet, and the cedar waxwing succeeds in feeding its own young. So there are natural strategies in regards to working against brown-headed cowbirds. Again, the parasitic nesting is a completely understandable strategy, but you definitely want to make sure that other species can thrive with their own young too. So just an interesting fact of pointing that out there as well too. So when the nestlings of the cedar waxwings finally have all of their feathers, you can kind of see in this stage we're at that in-between phase where all the feathers are in, but it's not completely grown. And as we move, we're still in winter, so I'm not like pushing anything too soon, but nesting season is coming. So just remember, if you see any really short tails, kind of fluffy, downy bodies, and possibly just like feathers that don't look grown in all the way, those are your fledglings. In most cases, they're usually fine. They're kind of getting used to spreading their wings. Probably the parents are nearby somewhere as well too. So that is a normal look for them. And in this case, the cedar waxwings do look very similar to the adult parents as well. You could tell that there's like the beginning of a crest here, but it's not quite fully developed. The mask isn't very large. So like I said, the more white on the mask, the younger the individual. You can see the tail automatically has that tail band at the end as well. And on the belly, it's some actually dusky streaking. Usually a lot of younger fledglings have like that streaking belly as well too. So that's also a good indicator as to whether or not it's a young juvenile versus an adult as well. So somebody asked earlier what kind of plants are really good to offer for cedar waxwings, and these are just a few of the options there as well too. But overall, there's a few ways to get them into your yard. Or actually, like I said, cedar waxwings are pretty nomadic. So it's one of those things of it's hard to tell whether they'll be there or not. But if you have them one year, chances are they'll either be back later that season or arrive the next year. So being prepared for them is always a fun thing to do. Technically, you could try fruit offerings, because example, some people do oranges for Orioles and things like that. You could possibly do fruit offerings for waxwings in the wintertime if they're in your winter range. So blueberries, blackberries, strawberry, and this is of course, this goes true for planting those options as well. If you wanted to do chopped apple, you could, but just keep in mind that if you offer fruit like that, you want to make sure it remains fresh. It's gonna take time for these birds to find them if they are in the area, so keeping that maintained is important. And you also don't want it to ferment, because like we said, we already discussed why that's not the best idea for them either. So fruit offerings are an option if you know cedar waxwings are in the area, but it is kind of high maintenance. So honestly, going with native plants that the birds do enjoy is also very important. Then lastly, the reason that cedar waxwings have the name cedar in them is because they absolutely love cedar berries. So if you have any cedar trees that are in your area, definitely keeping them up and around and making sure they're maintained is something that the waxwings might enjoy. Again, they're going to be more interested in a little bit more of those open woodlands, so that'll increase your chances if you have the cedar trees in those kinds of areas. But dogwood, serviceberry, juniper, hawthorn, winterberry, and also since some of you are from different locations, for example, Texas, you might want to check what plants work best in your area, because of course there's different planting options and everything. But these are also great options. things I would stay away from is definitely take a look at invasive species of plants. So for example, Chinese privet, which overtakes a landscape like nobody's business, has a lot of berries that the cedar waxwings will eat, which is great. But then you think about the fact that these cedar waxwings are going to transfer the seeds somewhere else, which allows this invasive plant to go somewhere else. And what'll happen is that one plant will choke out an entire habitat with just Chinese privet, and then you've got no biodiversity, which means it can only sustain so many animals versus the variety that it had before. So that's like the difference between like your native plants, which usually compete in a healthy environment with other species, versus an invasive, which just kind of chokes out the landscape and only provides one option, which reduces the variety that you'll have. So definitely kind of check those options out as well. And just basically do your research on specific types of things that you're looking for too, because you know what looks best in your yard, but there's definitely options that work well for it. Lastly, if plants aren't really an option and you've kind of just working with plants that you have already, water features are a fantastic option. Somebody said earlier that they had a cedar waxwing at their bird bath. That is exactly an easy place that you'll spot them, and it's an easy thing to offer too. Whether it's a standing, hanging bird bath, or if it's just like a small Tupperware, something that's kind of in the ground, or just a small tray, do what works best for you. But offering water during this time of year is just as important as the summertime. Helps keeps the birds' feathers clean, and when they are clean, they're very good at keeping in warmth, which is very important for this time of year. So that's why you also see a lot of birds taking a bath, even though it's super cold outside. So definitely take all that into consideration when you're finding out what works best to offer your waxwings as well. So with that said, for those of you that are at least in the area, I do have, or at least in North Carolina, or if you're a customer a little farther out, that's all good. I do have a coupon for you guys. It's $5 off 25 coupon code. The code is Waxwing, so it's only available today. In store or phone order. If you have any questions about that, feel free to give us a call. We do have a second telling of this presentation at 11 in store if you know anybody that happens to be in the area and you think they would enjoy this as well. Here are my resources. A lot of the photos came from Macaulay Library, which is a really good archive resource for learning more about your birds. They've got great photos, videos, and audio that people just upload because it's a great resource to learn more about songbird identification. And if you're looking to find more about different types of birds in your area or more about waxwings, allaboutbirds.org is also a great option to try as well. With that, I do want to say thank you so much for all the activity going on in the chat today. I really appreciate it. And once again, I hope you all have a wonderful new year. Oh, wait. Around what month do they start migrating back north? Okay, because I see that now. So, for migration season, usually that's going to start early spring. For us, nesting starts March through August in our range. So you can assume, and for me, I feel like the fall migration is a little bit more straightforward than the spring one because it kind of changes depending on when they start nesting. So for us, what did I say? Hold on, we're going to go back for a second. I said they're nesting, they start forming pairs in April to June. So chances are they are going to go back to like their area in like February or March, depending on where they plan on nesting as well too. So kind of keep that in mind as well. And that's probably kind of the best option there. And of course, like I said, sometimes some individuals are late, sometimes they're early, all depends on them too. So with that said, I'll go ahead and leave you. If you guys have any more questions, I'll be sure to jump back in there as well. But thank you guys so much for joining in. Like I said earlier, I hope you have a wonderful new year. If it's a rough start, you're just getting all the bad luck out of the way now, so it's smooth sailing for the rest of the year. But with that, I will see you guys again in February for the next presentation. All the presentations are listed on our website as well, wbu.com/Concord, if you're interested to see what the next session is too. With that said, I will see you guys next time. Have a wonderful day and continue enjoying your birds.